Welcome to Joe College Radio. I'm your host, Miles King, joined by my co-host, Jordan Lunderman. How are you? How are you doing, Jordan?
I'm doing great, Miles. How about yourself?
I'm doing quite well. Are you sure you're doing that great after the performance your Hogs put in this weekend?
It was a horrible performance, very weak, but that doesn't affect me too much. Of course, I'm sad my Hogs lost, but there are way more important things. So that's what I find myself saying whenever the Hogs lose.
Well, if you guys didn't hear, Arkansas goes down to Auburn on the Plains and gets walloped 56-3 in a total dominating fashion by the Auburn Tigers. Nothing going on for offense for the Razorbacks, and they couldn't stop the rushing attack of the Tigers at all. How did this happen, Jordan?
Well, it's interesting because normally our defense is horrible at defending the pass, and that's been how it's been for as long as I can remember. But this year it's been interesting because we can't stop the run at all. And actually, to pull up some stats, we are 111th in the FBS in yards given up per game, and 128th, which is last place, in yards per carry, and 128th, which is last place in rushing touchdowns. So it seems like we just don't know how to set the edge on defense. And whenever you're an SEC school and you're able to recruit quality Division I talent, there's no reason why you should be that low. And I think that Rob Smith should look at his contract and probably be willing to buy him out because he's not performing to the expectations that he set his second year with us whenever he coached one of the best defenses in the SEC. What I'm hoping for, I've been following, of course, all the schools, but recently I've been looking at South Carolina, and of course they're horrible. But they have a head coach that is quite a defensive coordinator in Will Muschamp. And I'm thinking if by the end of the season South Carolina gets rid of Muschamp, he might want to get a quality job in the SEC as a defensive coordinator where he really found his niche at Texas whenever he led great defenses there. But getting back to the game itself, it was never close. From the beginning, there's a speed sweep that went about 75, 80 yards for a touchdown, and our defensive line and offensive lines just got manhandled. Austin Allen got injured in the second quarter, and he continued to play until virtually the end of the fourth quarter. And they're having to evaluate Austin's injury, and just as they're continuing to look at it, it seems to be an MCL sprain, which is similar to the injury that Luke Del Rio sustained earlier in the season, it's promising for the Razorbacks because it means he'll come back fairly quickly, but and thankfully we have a bye week this week to allow our players to recover. We have a lot of players that are banged up and a lot of players that were playing with injuries. It was interesting. I was reading an article about that. We just had a lot of guys that were not even 80%, most of them 60%, just not ready to compete against an SEC team or really any Power 5 team. But hopefully we'll be able to rest up and get ready for Florida in 2 weeks. And Miles, if this continues, is there any way that Arkansas will be able to beat Florida, who's dominant on the ground?
I can't say that I see them beating Florida at this point in time, especially if Florida gets Luke Del Rio back. This was a terrible performance by the rushing defense. The Auburn ripped off 543 yards on the ground, 9.5 yards per carry. That's only contributing to their last place ranking in rush defense in yards per carry for the Hogs. But this was just abysmal. I was able to watch a little bit of the game, and I was just shocked that it was this out of hand. I know we touched on this a week ago, I think, when we were talking about the drunk professor that was quite upset with Brett Bielema, but looking back now, does he have a point? Like, are your feelings changed with Bielema now?
No, I don't put this game on Bielema at all. We expected you expect at least one time a season for one unit of your team to kind of lay an egg, and that's what our offense did in this game. And even if they had played their hearts out, given it their best game, our defense didn't give our team a shot, and they haven't all year. Our offense is having to outscore a lot of people with no help from the defense, except an occasional turnover here or there. But I think this goes on defensive coordinator Rob Smith. And like I said, I would love to have a Will Muschamp or really anyone else come in. We can even
please anyone
else. I'm offering the job right now. Please, if you're listening, you're probably going to do a better job. At least you'll do an equal job because you'll still be in last place at the worst. So
yeah, you can only improve.
That's true. Yeah, and we'll pay. Hopefully, we'll pay close to what we're paying Rob Smith, which is way too much. I'm really hoping for a change in the offseason, and we've had a pretty rough coaching carousel since Petrino left, just coaches in and out, whether it's head coaches or coordinators. But this is a time when it's truly necessary to switch and get fresh ideas in. I would take a grad assistant at this point because they're probably learning under Bielema, who's a defensive-minded coach. Or we could even have Bielema do what Charlie Strong did and start calling the defensive plays and defensive schemes.
Well, hopefully if he did that, it'd be a little more effective than what Charlie's been doing recently.
I would hope so, but even if it wasn't, it would still be at worst last place, which is where we are right now. So we'll see. I would really love Muschamp.
Yeah, I mean the Hogs they've got the bye this week, but they'll have to bounce back in a big way if they want to beat Florida. And of course they did. They do have the wins against TCU and Ole Miss this year. But also either one of those they were close games, could have been losses. If they lose either of those, they'd be sitting in a bad spot right now with a tough end of the schedule coming up. But hopefully the Hogs get things figured out. Bielema, he's a proven quality coach. I expect him to right the ship with a bye week. So,
and Miles, it looks like it's just two different teams showing up for the Razorbacks. Like you said, quality wins over TCU and Ole Miss, but then laying an egg against a great Alabama team, and then an Auburn team that might be able to do something in the Iron Bowl. We're still not sure about that, but definitely a team that's better than they were expected to be coming into the season. No excuse for the Hogs. Giving up 9.5 yards per carry, like you said, it's just inexcusable. But maybe we get the team that showed up against Ole Miss or the team that showed up against TCU whenever the Gators come to town.
Yeah, well, they better, because it's an embarrassment to get beat like that, so it better not happen again, or else not only the defensive coordinator could be on the hot seat, we could see Brett Bielema start to get some pressure for his job. Let's move on to the Cowboys of Oklahoma State traveling up to Lawrence, and what's always a weird game when the Cowboys travel up there. Always an early kick. Nobody's excited to play Kansas at Kansas. It's less attendance than at a Union High School football game at a stadium which is possibly worse than Union's. But
wow,
the Kansas Jayhawks kept this one close for a long time. And then in the second half, about midway through the third quarter, the Cowboys really took control of the game, held onto the ball, and pulled away to win 44-20. But like I said, it was dicey early on. The Cowboy offense was sputtering. Even though we went on to win the game, the defensive performance was not inspiring at all. As Montel Cozart threw for 250 yards, which is way over his record for the season so far. The secondary, once again, not inspiring confidence, but we did have that fantastic play. I don't know if you saw it, where Jordan Stearns intercepted it, ran about 20 yards, pitched it to Vincent Taylor, and Vincent Taylor once again a perfect option pitch to Jarrell Owens, who rumbled down to about the 25. It was completely unnecessary for us to lateral so many times on an interception that was in the middle of the third quarter, but at least was entertaining and we held on to the ball. But how do you feel about this OSU team right now? Do you think are they just playing down to the level of their opponents, or are they really just not that good?
I think on the offensive side of the ball, they're improving every game of the season. And it looked slow at first, for sure. But they didn't give Mason Rudolph nearly the volume of throws that he normally has, only having 24 attempts in this game. It did seem slow. But that's because you're handing it off to an all-star in Justice Hill, who had 22 carries for 162 yards. This kid's for real, and he's proving it week in and week out. In the last 4 games, he's had 3 that have been 120-yard rushing games or more as a true freshman. And so whenever you run the ball, and especially for a team like Oklahoma State that likes to air it out, whenever you start running the ball, it seems to slow the game down. And I think that's the mental effect it had. But really the Cowboys, it didn't seem like the Jayhawks were really threatening at any point. While the score was close throughout the first 2 quarters and a little bit into the third quarter, the Cowboys really pulled away as the third quarter wore on. And, the defense is really the only question mark for me. A pretty good rush defense. They didn't give up a whole lot of yards. I'm sure it was more than they would like, but only about 160 yards from Kansas. And you can take anything less than 200 and usually be successful. This Oklahoma State team seems like a bend don't break kind of defense, similar to the team that's coming to town this weekend in West Virginia, who they don't have the best rushing stats and passing defense stats, or rushing defense and passing defense stats, but they keep the ball out of the end zone, and they have one of the best red zone defensive efficiencies in the country. And that's reminds me a lot of this Oklahoma State team, that while they'll let you drive for a good chunk of the field, they're not going to let you score a whole lot in the end zone.
Yeah, and you're right. We will have a big challenge this week when the Mountaineers come to town. I think their defense is a little bit better than you're giving them credit for, as they shut down the Texas Tech offense, only held them to 10 points when Patrick Mahomes was in the game. And you saw, we'll talk about this game next, but you saw OU versus Texas Tech, them just scoring on every drive. So I think their quality, I think it's going to definitely be a big test. Like you said, we've got a decent run defense, but it's the secondary which really is worrying for us. A lot of experience, but still not great results. Like I said, Montel Cozart having a career day, throwing for 250 yards, which is unacceptable whenever you're playing Kansas, to let him come in and do that to you whenever he was benched for the last 2 games. But hopefully they get some things figured out. I don't know if we talked about this last week, but Glenn Spencer is starting to get some pressure from the fans to perform a little bit better, because he had an elite defense his first year here in 2013, a legitimate top 10 defense in the country. But each year since then, they've been mediocre to below average. So they definitely need to improve.
And that seems a lot like the Arkansas predicament. You have a guy that comes in and immediately gets some success, and I guess the teams in the league figure out the scheme and they're able to scheme around it. And I guess our 2 defensive coordinators are not great at making the adjustments they need to mid-season, or maybe they're just stubborn and they believe that their way is the best way and it just shouldn't be changed.
Yes, well, if they continue to think that way, they both might be out of a job by the end of the season.
We could have a defensive coordinator switch.
Yeah, how about a trade?
Yeah,
No,
I'd be okay with that.
I'd rather not.
I'll do that. I'll take your offer.
Yeah. But like I said, we'll talk about this in the preview pod, but big game in Stillwater as West Virginia comes to town. The important thing, Cowboys get the victory, get out of Lawrence unscathed, and move on. Let's move on to the game that I alluded to just now. The Sooners in Lubbock defeat the Texas Tech Red Raiders 66-59. And yes, you heard that right, 66-59. Literally in the second half, I don't think a single defense got a stop. I think the only time an offense didn't score when they had the ball was whenever OU kneeled to end the game. But it was just absolute insanity. The offensive numbers are crazy. Patrick Mahomes accounting for over 800 total yards. Both teams finished with 854 yards total. Is this fantastic offense or just horrible defense?
Well, just to hit on something you said earlier, had OU not taken a knee twice to end the game, they would have broken the combined, between Texas Tech and OU, the combined total yards in a game record. And they happened to take a knee to earn second place in that race. But we both know that these two defenses are horrible. Two of the worst in the country. They just can't stop anyone. And that's not to not give credit to these offenses, because we know Patrick Mahomes, anyone that throws for 734 yards is a legit NFL quarterback.
Yeah, 88 attempts.
With 88 attempts.
One shy of the NCAA record.
Thank you, Connor Halliday, for holding on. Washington State's proud of you. But getting on to Oklahoma, Baker Mayfield had a great game too, with a much lower volume of passes, but still 545 passing yards and 7 touchdowns. The offense seemed to have a chip on their shoulder, probably because they're fighting a lot more for Baker since he's in their unit. And then this defense they could not do anything. Their secondary is awful. They couldn't wrap up. And it was similar to the Arkansas game. I believe there were 38 missed tackles in the first half of the Arkansas game by Arkansas.
Wow.
And that's what it looked like in this OU game as well. I guess I don't know, they put something slippery, like maybe the Nickelodeon green slime. They put that on all the players before the game to make sure they couldn't get tackled. Or that stuff that they put on the bottom of Clark Griswold's sled in National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. But there's just nothing that these defenses could do, and whoever had the ball at the end was going to win. There weren't going to be any stops. The only 3 stops came from turnovers, 2 from turnovers, and 1, actually, Oklahoma got an actual stop with a real punt and everything.
A real punt.
An actual punt. The fans were flabbergasted. They had no idea what was going on. But it was a combination of the two, with some good offenses, but definitely horrible defenses.
Yeah, and as Joe Mixon was running wild in this game, he had 263 yards on the ground. He combined that with 114 yards through the air. Only had 4 receptions, and he scored a touchdown on 3 of them. I don't know how, as a defense, you lose your opponent's best player that many times, and you let him go for these insane numbers. But the Red Raider defense continued to crumble.
Well, Joe Mixon probably had the stripes from his prison uniform similar to the referees, so they probably couldn't tell whether he was a player or a referee.
They were a little bit the element of confusion there.
Yeah.
By Joe Mixon. But this was it was incredibly exciting for the neutral, but like you said, awful defenses. Oklahoma's secondary continues to underperform grossly. And then if you're a Sooner fan, this is what really might be scary. I can't remember if this was Mike or Bob, but in their press conference today, they were talking about the performance, and they said that none of their players were ever out of position. There weren't hardly ever blown coverages. They just could not cover their men.
I believe that was Mike Stoops, because he's not taking the blame for this horrible defensive showing, and it's obvious whenever it's the coach's fault versus the player's fault. You'll see, like you said, more busted coverages. I think that they're BSing a little bit. There's no way that you give up 734 yards off of 52 completions with no busted coverages or little busted coverages. The middle of the field was wide open the whole game, and I would consider having an area of the field completely uncovered a busted coverage because, or at least a horrible coaching mistake.
Yeah, it's just awful. Yeah, they're gonna have to fix that, or else maybe Mike Stoops feel in the hot seat. We're all for putting coaches on the hot seat on this show, especially
Absolutely.
defensive ones.
Well, whenever both teams give up 854 yards and almost combine for the record they would have if it hadn't been for the two knees at the end of the game, surely these two teams, defensive coordinators, should be on the hot seat, especially Texas Tech, who for years has had a great offense, but can't stop anyone on defense.
Yeah, and Cliff Kingsbury, at least they did bounce back and have a better performance than the week before whenever they were just completely shut down by West Virginia. But it's incredible that after all these years, they still cannot get a competent defense in. If they ever do just have a halfway mediocre defense, they could be a real force in the conference. But until that day, they'll continue to have the high-flying offense, but be middling around 6'6", 7'5" each year.
Definitely.
Let's move on to the biggest upset of the week. In a shocker, the number 2 Ohio State Buckeyes go down in Happy Valley to the Penn State Nittany Lions, 24-21. The decisive play was a blocked field goal returned for a touchdown by Penn State. Lots of people questioning Urban Meyer's decision to kick that field goal as the weather conditions weren't great, weren't optimal for kicking the field goal, but he went ahead, and you can't really blame him. You don't really expect for the kick to be blocked and returned for a touchdown, but people sure are questioning his decision. What did you think of that?
Miles, I'd have to agree with his decision there. He's an experienced coach, and he knows in that situation you want to force them to have to score a touchdown and kick the point after to even tie. And with the score being 21-17 before the field goal, if he had made it, it would have been a 7-point game and forced that situation. But you don't expect, like you said, you don't expect Penn State to block your field goal and return it for a touchdown or even block it. You know in the back of your mind that that's a possibility, but definitely not a likelihood. And it was a calculated risk with the weather conditions, but I would have taken that chance. And you can't blame it on Urban Meyer. You have to blame it on the young man that had a horrible whiffed block, causing that blocked field goal.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I think in the situation, it's the right decision. I mean, you're never going in expecting for your field goal to be blocked. But this was really a collapse by the Buckeyes. They were going into the fourth quarter up 21-7. Penn State really hadn't done anything on offense throughout the game. And the stats show that they didn't have a great performance. It's not as if Penn State, if you look at the stats, you'd definitely think Ohio State won. But somehow the Nittany Lions, they scrapped their way to this hard-fought victory, and it is well-deserved. A huge upset taking down the Buckeyes. No one would have ever expected this. And now people may be starting to question Ohio State's quality as they didn't play a great game against Wisconsin, but they came back to win that in overtime, and now blowing this one against Penn State. They're one of my picks for the playoffs, so this hurts. Of course, I'm going to cheer against them because I'm never going to cheer for the favorite, but this hurts my credibility potentially.
Well, Miles, I think everyone was in that boat with you, except for me. I did have the Wolverines, and I still believe in them since they statistically have the best defense and their offense is doing well. But like you said, in this game, looking purely at the stats and even watching the game, there's no way that Penn State should have won. With Trace McSorley going 8 for 23, our high school quarterback probably could have gone in and done better. And that's saying a lot. I just don't see how they were able to win this game. Like you said, down 21-7, and going into the fourth quarter, with no offensive spark at all. I was shocked to see this result. I didn't get to watch much of the game, but I saw bits and pieces, and every single part that I saw, other than the highlight of the blocked kick, Penn State had nothing going for them.
Yeah, it's just looking at, like, I wasn't able to watch this game either, but looking at from the outside, you would never expect Penn State to be the ones emerging victorious, and it wasn't that no turnovers by Ohio State. You just kind of have to scratch your head and wonder why. But you got to give credit to Penn State for coming out and playing tough and pulling off the victory, and it's a huge win for James Franklin. This could be his signature win that maybe launches this program back into national prominence.
Yeah, and did you see the post-game conference that he had?
I did not.
The reporters were asking him, "Are you about to go like celebrate with your team? Like you're gonna go, I don't know, like hang out with the team and have a bunch of fun and whatever?" And he said, you reporters think that the coaches just have such an extravagant life. We're just always doing something. I'm gonna go home. I'm gonna say goodnight to, I think it was his daughter. He said, "I'm gonna say goodnight to my daughter. She wasn't watching the game anyways. She didn't really care about football, but I'll tell her what happened, and then I'm just gonna watch SportsCenter and see what the other scores of the games are and get ready for work tomorrow." And that shows his dedication to the game, and his destigmatization of college football coaches.
Yeah, and that's exactly the response you'd want from your head coach, to be calm and collected even after a big win like that. Now let's move on to a coach who is always calm and collected, never celebrates after a win, oftentimes irate after a win. That is the head coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide, Nick Saban. His team poured it on to A&M, winning 33-14 in what was a matchup of the number 1 versus number 6 team in the nation. Alabama was favored by 19 points ahead of this game, and they ended up matching that spread. So nobody is really super surprised that they went on to win like this. But disappointing it with a top 10 matchup like this to not even be close.
Well, and the score does not reflect how far this game was from Texas A&M's grasp. And in the first 4 drives, I believe, Alabama had 4 red zone trips. They had 2 field goals, a touchdown, and a missed field goal. And on each of those, they should have gotten into the end zone. So you're looking at a 15-point difference there, and it should have been a far greater margin of victory for the Tide. But I'm sure they'll take the victory. The players will. Saban will always find something to complain about, something to improve. But I'm sure the players are very excited with their victory over really the only team that people thought could possibly challenge the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, and this is the team that everybody thought would have a great chance at knocking them off. Of course, they have LSU coming up, and they have Auburn at the end. But at least looking at it on paper, this was the team poised to knock them off their spot as the top team in the nation. Of course, that did not happen. Trevor Knight was not able to emulate his heroics from 4 years ago in the Sugar Bowl, as he only went 14 of 31 for 164 yards, threw 2 touchdowns, but also had an interception. That's not the kind of game you're going to have if you're going to win in Tuscaloosa against Alabama. Jalen Hurts had a game manager-esque game. Had a couple of mistakes, though, 2 interceptions, but they were really carried by their ground attack. They ran for 287 yards. The A&M defense was just not able to stop them at all this weekend, and the Crimson Tide rolls on.
Yeah, and like we said last week, if there's, in our preview, which I hope you got to see, we released it late, and we're sorry about that, but just to allude to that a little bit, like Miles and I said in the preview, of this week, Nick Saban is the best at revenge games, and a lot of people said, "Oh, because Trevor Knight's on this team, he knows the secret recipe to beating Alabama." And you know that's not the case. It's not the player that puts the game plan together; it's the coaches. And OU out-schemed them a couple of years ago, but this Texas A&M team was not ready, and that was very apparent as the game wore on.
Yeah, in the end, it's the players that win games, but if you get out-schemed, if you get out-coached, you're not giving your players a chance. And even though Trevor Knight, he is a good player, he wasn't able to put the whole team on his back because Nick Saban was just obviously the better coach today. We're not going to go too in-depth on this game, but it was a massive upset. SMU beating Houston. Houston's college football playoff chances, if they weren't over whenever they lost to Navy, they absolutely are now. No way they're getting in. This was a bad loss. It wasn't even close for the entire game. They got beaten soundly by SMU. But it's a poor game. What do you think? What do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean this is lessening Louisville's chances of getting into the playoff now. Like you said earlier in the season, you thought after Houston's loss to Navy that that almost certainly eliminated Louisville from playoff contention. I wasn't so sure about that, but now that SMU throttled Houston, this just makes it like any other game for Louisville. It's not a statement win anymore, and they have to dominate in all phases of the game, similar to the way they did this weekend against NC State. But it's not gonna be a good win for their resume. Really, their out of conference games are a little bit obsolete at this point because all of those teams are getting beaten up on a little bit, and so thankfully they're in the ACC and they're sitting at number 5 right now, so they've got a good shot.
But yeah, I mean, if the right dominoes fall ahead of them, they could sneak in. But this is not helping their resume at all for Louisville. And another team that is not feeling very good after this game or this weekend in general is OU, as their strength of schedule takes a hit. They were pretty soundly beaten by Houston in the opening week and Ohio State 2 weeks later, and both of those teams lost this weekend. So a bad look for OU and just for the Big 12 in general.
Yeah, and on that point, I'm still confused about the conference realignment, and there have been new things coming out. It seems like the WikiLeaks stuff, but in college football form, with all of this information coming out about the agenda, things that Bowlesby said not to say whenever talking to the press, and it was things that David Boren pointed out. The whole reason that this conversation was started, that they didn't want them addressing to the media. So I'm just more and more confused as these things come out. But it definitely makes it more interesting, and it's probably going to leave Bob Bowlesby without his commissioner position. Yeah, Bowlesby has truly mismanaged the Big 12.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you. And this is the whole expansion thing has just been one big mess. It seems like they were never really looking to expand, just to play a game of chicken with the TV networks and try to squeeze some more money out of them. In the end, I think the Big 12 is doomed unless they. I don't know if we said this last week, but unless they come out and try to do something innovative, like maybe get a deal with, I don't know, a Netflix or a Hulu or somewhere like that, where they can stream their games and go full digital or go fully millennial. They don't have the brand names or the quality teams to compete in the traditional way with these other big conferences. But overall, it's probably for the best that the Big 12 is not expanding this year. Hopefully this finally closes the case on it. And that'll wrap up this part 1 of this week's podcast. Thank you guys for listening, and we will be sure to be on the lookout for part 2 later this week.
Have a good one.